Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jacob Restituto, and today we have a really cool interview between myself and Rob Richards where we talk everything between AI and the music industry, moving from North Carolina to Nashville and the differences between the two different cultures there, and just the music industry in Nashville in general. And we talk about mastering in music. So stick around, it's going to be a great conversation. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jacob Restituto, and I'm a musician from Northport, New York. And today we have absolute pleasure of having Rob Richards here on the channel, coming to you live from New York and Nashville. Thanks so much, Rob, for taking the time. Really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. My pleasure. My pleasure. Looking forward to this conversation. We are chatting in the green room. I guess we could call it the Zoom green room beforehand. So I know it's going to be a really good conversation. You're really a cool person to talk to and have tremendous grace for the technical difficulties we were experiencing with video prior to coming on here. So appreciate you, man.
All good. Yeah, all good.
You know it's going to be a good conversation when there's technical difficulties. Oh, it's just like we were talking about. You played for Elevation Church, and we know always that when there's issues. I play for the worship team of my church up here in New York, so you know when there's issues in the sound check, it's going to be a great service after the fact. It's one of those things, man.
Always.
So, for the people that aren't so super familiar with you and your story, can you give a little backstory and kind of just go back into your journey in the music industry and as far back as you want to go, or as little as you want to go back? Just tell us who you are and tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So I'm Rob Richards, mastering and software engineer based out of Nashville. My journey, honestly, kind of got started in high school, really. But there was kind of like a intro to web development course offered in high school, as well as AP music theory. So I kind of like knew early on back then that I was interested in both of those things. So it just kind of carried through, went to college for like web development stuff. And like played in bands local to the Raleigh area and church as well. So just coming up, I just kind of always have been in those two lanes. Yeah, whenever I was in Raleigh, I recorded bands back there. Kind of some of the other producers and artists I was working with kind of was getting more into mastering. They're starting to feed me mastering work, so I kind of leaned into that. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell, my direction and where it started. So
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It's interesting that the natural progression that kind of life takes. A lot of people doing so many of these interviews. It's just been interesting to hear about, like, oh, I started here and I kind of shifted to here, and now I'm really here. And so it's just, I guess the lesson in that, a lot, I mentioned in the original message to you about doing the potential interview. My goal is essentially just to spark faith in other musicians, because so many people are saying it's impossible to do anything in the industry. And also show the different opportunities that are within the industry. Not everybody's,
totally,
wants to be or meant to be a musician. There's so many other options out there, whether it be
totally.
mastering, mixing, behind the scenes. I've had managers here on the channel. So like just all
Yeah.
the different aspects of the industry. But that being said, just kind of going with the flow and seeing where life takes you in that process.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like whenever you try to hold on to something like with a tight grip, like it never ends up happening. You know what I
Sure.
mean? And in my specific case, like I have interest in two avenues. It's just kind of interesting out here in Nashville. Like I'm starting to make audio plugins out here in Nashville, in addition to mastering work. So it's like I would say if you have another passion or interest,
Mm.
don't think you have to discard one in order to pursue the other. Like who knows who you're going to meet in one area of your life that will pay off, in the future. So, yeah, if you have an interest, like don't shy away from it.
Yeah, man. I mean, I saw on your website, I saw a couple of things. I saw the Mr. J's bass plugin,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is real cool, man. Like it's for those that don't know, are super familiar with the music industry, recording music. A plugin is something you use when you're recording, or something you can use when recording to whether it be an effect or an instrument to make sounds, essentially. And Rob created a plugin that, I mean, if you want to explain it better than I can, but like essentially you can play bass.
Yeah. So that's from a vintage jazz bass. It was actually on loan from a buddy of mine. I was working on it, and whenever I told him it was done, he kind of looked at me. He's like, "All right, well, how much do I owe you?" And I was like, "Well, how about you let me sample it and create a plugin of it, and we'll call it even." He was like, "I don't care. Keep it for however long you need." So, yeah, at the time I had some pretty good signal chain on the front end for recording. So yeah, man, I just ended up sampling every note on the bass multiple ways. So
So I would love to just, this is a super nerd in me, the music producer super nerd in me. I would love to hear the process of sampling an instrument to create a plugin. If you could
yeah,
just go into in depth, because this is super nerdy. So I don't know who people will be interested, but I'm interested. So tell me the process that you went through, sample from the very inception of sampling the instrument to it becoming the plugin that we can download today.
yeah, totally. So yeah, that process was basically every note, I'd hit a note, let it sustain for as long as it would go, and do that multiple different ways, right? So I would do there's basically 10 different variations of one note that could be played to basically, make it feel real, like a real bass player was playing it, right? So I would hit the note, let it ring out at a certain like intensity, so to speak. And then I would do like softer and softer. So like depending on how hard you're hitting the MIDI keyboard, you would get the different velocities.
Mm.
But then so think of that kind of like as one pillar of options. I did the same exact thing twice, and then it would like alternate a round robin between those different velocities. So like if you were to hit the same velocity on the keyboard, you wouldn't have like a robotic
Mm.
tone. It would sound like a bass player was like
Yeah,
alternating.
yeah, yeah.
So that was kind of the mindset behind that. Um, I also did like pickup noise because usually vintage instruments kind of have some sort of buzz, which in post production, I was able to remove all of that. But at the same time, I wanted to give the person the ability to have that if they wanted it.
Sure.
So there's just a knob on there for pickup noise where you can crank it up or down, blend it back in. There's like fret noise, like, how like you go from one note to another note. There's just like this little tiny, like,
Weak.
yeah, like the skin on the strings, like that little subtle detail. And also like when you pick your finger up off of a note, it kind of has like this very short, like buzz noise.
Hmm.
So I added that into all random. So just kind of like, breathe life into a virtual instrument because that can be tough. Like the little nuanced details absolutely matter.
Absolutely. Just to kind of like full circle it, it's come almost kind of like this whole new AI industry within the music and or just the world in general, but also specifically in the creative industry. It can do a lot of the things, but it lacks a lot of the nuance of things. For example, like as a prompt for songwriting recently, I had Chat GPT write me a song. And I just because I was like, well, what do you have? What is it? What does it see? And from that, I was like, 95% of this is terrible because, it's just they just made things rhyme, but they were cool concepts within the other 5%. It was like, oh, that's actually really clever, and then like, how can I redo that or change it or take a lyric of that and like reword it so I'm not plagiarizing a
Yeah.
computer. I don't know what the answer to that is, but
I don't
but the point being though, it's that life that humanity has when playing an instrument like you can't necessarily replicate with it. The perfection is too much of a computer
yeah,
than a human.
just feels like a robot. Yes, that was kind of the driving factor. Not to throw shade at any other plugin, but it just felt like everything was very clean
Hmm.
and, didn't have those nuanced details. So that's really kind of the motivation behind creating my plugin. So
So now taking it a little step further, what's the process of okay, so I don't know what you Pro Tools or Logic, whatever the case. You're in Logic. I use Logic. You record everything. You have now 500 samples. What does that look like after the fact?
yeah, so the platform, there was a couple of different options I had for the platform, but I ended up going with Contact,
Okay.
their simple engine.
Native instruments.
Um,
Yeah.
mhm. So that thing, it's really powerful. And the process for that was the naming convention. So I programmed it in such a way that it's looking for a specific name.
File name.
Yep, file name. Um, so like the code is like firing off what should be there, and it's just looking for that specific file path. So it keeps the code clean, and as long as I organize it well, there's not really that much of a headache. So
That's pretty wild, man. Very cool. It's a pretty
yeah,
cool process.
yeah.
You don't meet somebody every day that creates their own plugin. So I think that it's a pretty unique trait that you have there, man, for sure.
Yeah, well, going back to what I was saying, like, had I, picked one path over the other, I wouldn't have these skills. And, once
Exactly.
people around town like figure out that I, build plugins, a lot of guys are like, hey, you want to grab coffee? You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
It opens up doors with people that wouldn't normally,
Mm.
have anything really to offer. So for me, it's really like trying to offer the most for people. Like if I'm in any collaboration, whether that's doing a mastering project or software project, like, what is it that I offer that could move the project forward, really?
Mm. Are there any plugins you're currently working on now
There are a few.
that are under the hood at the moment?
Yes.
Okay.
Soon,
Well,
soon
what
to
was
be.
it? Okay. I'm excited to see what they come out of that, man, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's really cool. Okay, so let's talk about the transition from, playing a bunch of music and stuff. And um, what was the driving factor that moved you guys out of Raleigh? If I don't know if we talked about this in the actual interview yet, but or not. I know we were talking about it before. You were originally based out of Raleigh, North Carolina,
Yes.
moved to Nashville, what, about a year ago?
Correct.
What brought you to Nashville, Music City? And I have a couple of questions, follow-up questions about Nashville after the fact.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's really no easy way to put it, I guess, other than the fact that, like, in Raleigh, I just felt like I just was looking to um, be in a bigger market, I guess, just like be closer to the scene.
Hmm.
Like I was always joking, like several years prior to moving, like, hey, babe, we're going to move to Nashville. And she just kind of like gave me the stink eye. We have kids and family was back in North Carolina. So it was
Hmm.
one of those things. But one day I just felt like, I was on a prayer walk and just felt like the word of the Lord just said, sell your house and move to Nashville. And honestly, I just laughed. And I was like, okay, well, you're going to have to convince my wife.
How did that go?
Well, whenever I told her, she just kind of looked at me. I told her the next morning, I was like, babe, we need to talk. And I told her, and whenever I was on that walk, I just feel like we need to sell the house and move to Nashville. And so whenever she looked at me and I was like, what is it? What's going on? And she's like, before you went on your walk, I was praying for you that God would give you boldness. And I just started laughing and I was like, well, here's the answer to your prayer.
That's
So
crazy.
yeah, that's kind of how it played out. But yeah, it was,
So now here into Nashville, I'm curious what your opinion is. It's like, how do you like it there, kind of thing?
um, I love it, man.
That's
It,
cool.
it's amazing. I love Nashville. I really do.
So it's an interesting aspect. I visited a handful of times, for pleasure, for work, both, all the above. And what I found interesting and slightly overwhelming, so I'm curious on your opinion on this. Part of the reason why I asked if you liked it or not is that the aspect of how many musicians there are, and you go and it's like, wow, this is so cool. Everybody's a musician. But on the other hand, it's like, well, this is terrifying. Everybody's a musician.
Yeah.
Where like I'm from New York, but I'm not from the city. I'm from an hour outside of the city. I'm from a place called Long Island, which is, a strip of land outside of the city. Um, so there are musicians out here, it's a decent music scene, but it's not like New York City or LA or Nashville, it's you have a bit of distance because I also live in the suburbs. So when you go to Nashville, you see you go to a bar or anything, it could be a bar, a coffee shop, anything. You see 16 computers and they all have Pro Tools or Logic open. It's like, wow, this is so cool, but also so terrifying at the same time. So I'd just love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. I mean, yes, to your point, yes, there are a sea of musicians and all of them are absolutely incredible.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but I guess for me, again, with my ethos of like wanting to offer something, there's not a lot of mastering guys. There are mastering guys here, absolutely.
Sure.
Um, but in my specific case, there's tons of producers, tons of mixers, and it's really just building that trust with those guys. But yeah, I mean the scene is absolutely huge out here. Which yes, it can be overwhelming, but at the same time, for me, that's energizing because
Yeah.
whenever I know I'm around people that are absolutely at the top A game, like that pushes me to be better.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
so it's kind of like if you're that type of person that likes the pressure of like
Sure.
you want to surround yourself that with people that are better than you, then this is definitely a good place to do that. So
That's a great point. Absolutely. Just also in the aspect of like you mentioned, just the opportunity that's there because there aren't a ton. There's a ton of guitar players, but not necessarily a ton of mastering engineers.
yeah,
So
Yeah.
I just love to hear your process of for somebody that wants to maybe say get into like if a viewer's watching this and they want to get more into mastering or mastering their own music because maybe they can't afford to master.
Yeah.
I would just love to hear your opinion on how you personally learned what you got how you got into that space.
Listen to a lot of music, know what sounds good, know what, invokes a feeling when you
Mm,
listen to music. And then once you have that feeling, like do research, look at the credits. Okay, who produced this? Who mixed this? Who mastered it? Like, and then go down the rabbit hole of like, okay, well, who's their inspiration? Like, where are they
yeah.
collecting all these things? Like, it's just like any creative field. It's just an expression of somebody's personal experience, right?
Hmm.
So for somebody wanting to get in this, like, be open to different genres. Like,
Mm,
consume a ton of music. Whenever I was working at a programming job, like I would listen to music all day. And so I would like put on a playlist and just kind of have it going in the background. But there was always like that, handful of songs that like stopped me in my tracks. I'm like, this song sounds phenomenal. Like, so I would stop working and then go down the whole trail of like who did what on that project. And then really learn the sound. But it definitely got to a point where I was like, I know who mixed this. I know who mastered this. So it's kind of like just developing your ear, developing your taste.
you
Whenever
got
you,
to a point where you could hear just from the mix who mixed it and mastered it.
yeah,
That's wild, man. So
like,
who are some that you like? It's some inspirations that you could just tell off the top of your hand. Oh, so and so mastered this or mixed this.
any mix that Serban did, master by Randy, like those two guys. Anytime one of their songs came on, like I'd point them out. Uh,
Hmm.
so
What about them? Like, what are the telltale signs for them specifically?
the low end and the mid range, like
Hmm.
always beautiful, amazing.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
Very interesting. We talking speaking specifically about mastering. We are talking very briefly about him beforehand. In a conversation that I had with Chris Garinger, phenomenal mastering engineer. We talked about the fact that like how so many people are like, man, like what are your tips? What are your secrets? What like I want to do? I want to be you. He's like, dude, like the only advice I have is the fact that I've been doing this for 40 years, and like, but in that 40 years, one, you develop a skill, but two, you develop a style.
yeah,
It's the same thing like you can hear with songwriters. You can hear specific songwriters have very specific styles. Like Taylor Swift has a very distinct sound. So when she writes for Little Big Town or something like that, you could just tell it's a Taylor Swift song because of the way she writes. It's the same thing with somebody mixing. They have use specific plugins that add a specific character to music, mix in a certain way that they like.
yep.
And obviously enough people like it too that they're willing to pay them the money for it.
Totally. Yeah. And again, it's the emotion. Like those
Mm,
guys have honed in, like, okay, these frequencies and how I push things give a specific emotion. And I like that. That's kind of like,
mm,
their what you were saying, like their sound. For
mm,
me, I always know a song is done whenever I get goosebumps. Like I look for
mm.
that goosebump feeling. You know what I mean? Finding the best parts of a song, embellishing them, bringing them out to the forefront, and then getting that feeling is really like what I aim for. So
So let's say you worked a ton on a track and you haven't gotten the goosebumps. What are some things you would test try to be like, okay, like what can we do to try to improve this? Like how would you yeah, test like what would you do to go out there?
are you looking for like technical or like what?
Yeah, however you want to answer it.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things like just simple volume automation.
Mm,
Between like a verse to a chorus doesn't have to be much. Zero point 0.3, zero point 0.5 dB. Just a little boost, just something to kind of like make the chorus like pop out of the speakers. That's usually the first place I would go, just to have that contrast of like, okay, something is building. Here's the chorus, like right in your face, giving you the wall of sound
So
thing. So
you would slowly build up, or would you slowly build down so that when the chorus comes, it's back up here?
yeah, so it depends on the track. Like if I'm working on a pop track where the chorus needs to explode, like it would be a hard automation, like a hard line. But if it's kind of like a CCM kind of build
Yeah,
into the chorus, it would just kind of like do a gentle ramp what with
yeah.
like the drums are doing like that, or it's just every song is different, like how the dynamics work out. But yeah, volume automation is probably something that I would reach for first.
Mm,
Because like the mix, everyone is signed off on it, right? So you don't want to be like too aggressive with EQ or compression. Like everyone knows that they like what they sent me, right? So with volume automation, I can still get that kind of that draw out of it without completely butchering a mix. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah.
Because certainly there's tricks you can pull off to make the chorus feel like more low end. Let's just automate some low end or do something crazy, which that, in mastering, you typically don't want to do anything heavy handed like that.
I mean, you right there, the tech just on the technical makes great sense.
Yeah.
And speaking technical, actually, I want to bring up one of the facts of just a really interesting tool I found on your website is uh, let me see if I get it correctly, but it was on the Wave Division website, the Wave Division Co. with where you can put in it has so much information, but like you could put in the tempo of a song and gave you all the divisions of the beats,
Yep.
or like you could put in at a single note and it would tell you what the hertz, the frequency waves are for it.
Yeah.
And as a musician, first of all, that loves a bit of math I hear once in a while. I
Yeah.
thought that was such a cool tool that like I feel like could totally deserve a ton more promotion because so many musicians can benefit from that.
Yeah, totally. So the idea behind that was really setting the attack and release times on my limiter,
Mm.
final output. If I wanted to do like a quarter note, half note release, or so I needed, something quick that I could just punch in the, BPM and it would literally spit out everything that I needed for that particular track. So it's kind of like a selfish workflow thing, but I was kind of like, I'll just throw it out on the internet. Let's see what, what
Well,
happens.
I need to keep it as a folder thing for when I don't do it so much anymore because I'm doing different things now. But when I worked, I did a lot of the mixing at the church, like for Sundays and stuff. We use a Behringer X32,
Yeah.
and they don't have any note divisions on there, like for the delay or something like that. It's only in milliseconds, which they have a tap tempo, which is fine. But if you want to be precise, like,
Yeah.
well, how the tempo of the song is 147, and I want to quote like. What's the millisecond? It's impossible. You just end up using obviously but it'd be cool if you could
Yeah.
automate it. It makes no sense as to why you can't put a BPM in there. It's
It's easy.
ridiculous.
I don't know.
But whatever. Point being, I'm like, this is a really cool tool. And
Yeah.
also for the frequencies too. Like for example, if typically in hip hop, but like if you want to really push the 808, for example,
Yep.
you can find out what the pitch is, or if there's a weird, frequency, whatever, feedback.
Yep.
Oh, I know we're in the key of C sharp, so let's find that C sharp and where that is, and pull it up or boost it. It's really some really cool tools on there. Am
Yeah.
I correct in saying that it's the Wave Division audio or what's the
Yeah. So wavedivision.co, I migrated to everything. That was the original mastering page, but I just started robrichardsmastering.com and the cheat sheet is on that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, man, that thing needs to get talked about more because like when I found out, it's like this thing is sick, dude.
yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, kind of like to your point with the frequencies and hertz. I used to tune a lot of my drums. So like, I would punch in the keys of the song and, get the kick drum sitting where it should be in the low
Yeah.
end, kind of build the bass around that and like the
Yeah.
tom, the low tom. So I would use that tool to do a lot of tuning of the drums as well. So
Yeah,
uh
absolutely.
yeah, what was that plugin? Little Bigfoot? It's like some sine frequency generator plugin
Okay.
where it's intended to have like a solid low end on percussion elements like your kick and toms. But
Oh,
yeah, I
like
would,
a pitched at low end.
yeah, yep. So I would use that to like really hone in the tom stuff and the
Oh yeah,
kick.
see that's really interesting. So like I've used something I think it's called Torque by Waves.
Yes,
It's very similar where you can like frequency adjust the drums, but usually you're just kind of listening for or watching the waveform of the parametric EQ. But
yep.
When you just know, oh, I know we're in the key of C sharp, so I really want the C sharp. I don't want to boost the D. When we're in a C sharp, it'll sound weird. Yeah, very interesting. So I would love to hear your creative flow as a master. When you start off, somebody sends you a fresh mix. Typically you're not working with stems, you're working with just the final wave, right?
Yeah, generally.
So
Yep.
somebody sends you a wave. What's your process? Let me hear. I mean, obviously the simple answer is always different for every single song, but like
Yeah.
generalized process.
Yeah. So I like to listen to the song again with the emotion. What's the song telling me?
Hmm.
The great parts. What can I highlight? So literally, I'll have a notepad beside me, play the song, close my eyes, and then like that thing that kind of like jumps out at me. I'm like, low end sounds great, or low mids could be tucked, or, just things like that. I'll just make a quick note. But really, like, what's the song telling me? So, I mean, to that point, you have to, have your monitoring system in your room, like, dialed in. So I would say whatever you're used to, like, get really familiar with it.
Mm.
So yeah, with mastering, man, it's really just listening to it.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
Figure out like the meters will tell you stuff too, and like, yeah, just what's it telling you?
What's your typical ideal? This is another technical question. Your ideal headroom space for a track that's sent to you. So for people that aren't actually, why don't you can I hear you explain headroom for people that aren't super familiar, and then kind of answer the question from there?
Yeah, so I mean, the headroom is basically how loud the audio file is from zero, which basically, like, if something is super loud, then that kind of does tie the mastering engineer's hands a little bit in terms of like boosting EQ and doing compression and stuff like that. But I mean, I've had all kinds of different levels sent to me. Recently I had one that was -7, but that was what was signed off on. I'm not going to like say, hey, this mix is
Hmm.
bad. Like, everyone loved it. So what can I do as a mastering engineer do to like enhance what people already love?
Sure.
Sometimes the limiter, pushing it that hard into the limiter, is the sound that they're looking for. And I just need to adjust on my end. Because, as long as it's not like straight up at, zero, or like, -3, -4, then I can, gain it down, get the proper input levels to my gear, my
Hmm.
plugins, and then gain it back up with my process applied. So as long as it's not like completely cooked whenever I get it, then yeah, if it
So,
feels good.
do you have a specific range that you like working with? Was it like 4 to 7 or 4 to 8 or 6?
That I deliver, or what's delivered to me?
Both, actually. That's a good question.
Yeah, so that's delivered to me. Like I said, as long as it's not pushed super hard, I can generally work with a lot. And what I'm delivering. Here's a pro tip: you don't ever want to deliver something quieter. So
Yeah.
at least bring it up at the same level that's delivered to you. But yeah, so I mean, again, the song, it really depends if I'm doing like a CCM thing or ambient thing. I've done stuff like that. I've done reggae stuff. Like,
Hmm.
they all have different feels. So
Mhm.
you just kind of, like, I was going back to what I said before, like, listen and know what genres are supposed to sound like.
Mhm.
Like, defining characteristics of genres are going to be your kick, snare, vocal, bass. So as long as you get those things within that kind of, like, I would say, genre of definition, then you'll probably do all right.
Yeah,
So
yeah, sure.
um,
So just I'm curious now, just again, some more technicals. What do you had? So let's say like a CCM track, what the Christian contemporary music, I guess the
yep, yep.
CCM versus pop rock. What are some big defining factors between the two of those? Like, how would you define those different genres in a mix or in a master?
Yeah, so like CCM is going to be leaning towards more live elements, live drums, generally. Pop rock, you're going to probably have your guitars and like maybe like a sample kick, very consistent kick. In terms of loudness, pop rock will go up to generally anywhere from around like -6, sometimes crack -5.8, around that ballpark.
In the final mix,
Yeah,
or
so
in the in
that's the final master is
sorry,
generally,
final mix.
yep, that's how loud those are.
So why do you then end up still leaving headroom and not bring it to zero?
Well, if you bring it to zero, you're just going to have tons of distortion. So like in mastering, you're trying to find that balance of like, how much distortion can I add without it sounding bad? Like, you can have
Hmm.
distortion and you can have bad distortion.
Sure,
Usually when stuff is really loud, that means the limiter is just really loud,
sure.
which that doesn't really, add anything. You're sucking away all that dynamic range. So think of like your dynamic range here. If you're pushing stuff really loud, here's the top of the limiter. All that stuff is just getting smushed straight up in that limiter.
Exactly.
You have
Yeah.
zero dynamic range. So, I mean, dynamics are a good thing. I mean, loudness is good, yes, but your song on streaming platforms will be turned down. So you need to
Sure.
find that balance of like what feels good. It's all about feeling, or else you're going to end up like a robot, like an AI.
Sure.
It's like, here's something loud and that's it. You know what I mean? Again, with mastering, for me at least, it's, if I don't get that feeling of like dynamics are there, the vocal performance is there, the low end is there, then like I got to keep going until I find it.
Mm,
So sometimes that's with it being loud, sometimes it's not. So
yeah.
Just depends.
So following up on that and the feeling of music and the feeling of the mix or the master, way before AI was a conversation in modern media, a company called Lander, probably about 8 years ago at least, came out with a software, an online software where you can upload your music and have it mastered by them by an AI generated algorithm.
Hmm.
Back then, they didn't even call it AI. It was called like an algorithmic master or something like that. Now, obviously, we know that as AI. I just wanted love to hear your opinion on software generated masters and what you think they lack, or what you think they do really well with.
AI mastering, I guess AI in general, it can only look at things that's like what has been. So here's time where we are currently. It can only look at things in the back.
Mm,
If you are a creative and you want to, push the envelope, try new things, AI absolutely cannot replace that because it has not been yet. So if you're going to be an artist for the creative aspect and you want to actually create a sound and you have your name on it, and like whenever somebody listens to it, they're like, I know this is artist XYZ. You're probably better off hiring somebody with feel that can interpret what you're doing versus AI that can only look at like what has been and then maybe apply kind of like a plastic wrapped version of that. You know what I mean? Now, to that point, AI, it can point out some technical issues, like if there's phase issues going on in the low end or mid range. I mean, that I would say, it's very useful for that. But again, in terms of something you're pouring your, time and effort and experience into, having something at the very end potentially butchering that, like, I mean, it's up to you, but at the same time, like, what are you viewing this as an artist? Like, are you looking at it honestly as a business? Are you looking at it as something you want to do long term? Because you're creating a product.
mhm.
And if you're going to create a product, you want to, put your best foot forward because there's a sea of artists out there, right? Everybody's putting out music. For yourself to give that emotional reaction for your listener, if you don't have that emotional reaction, or if there's, AI who doesn't have that emotional reaction,
Sure, absolutely.
then it's not going to be there. So
Yeah.
um, that's my thought on it.
So that's one of the most interesting aspects of in terms of just general talking about the whole AI industry and the creative arts. One of the most interesting points you bring up is the fact of AI can only look at the past. And I don't know super much about it because everybody talks about the fact that AI can learn from itself. I don't know. But if that is the case, and AI can only learn from its past, it's really interesting as an artist because I was speaking with somebody a couple of weeks ago. He's a live front of house mix engineer. And he was talking about the fact, like we were talking about just how some certain artists stick around and some don't. And one of the defining factors is that these artists that are essentially genre creators. Why did Led Zeppelin stick around, as opposed to some other, like why are they still talked about, 60 years later, or you could go back as far back as like outside of music, but like Shakespeare or like inside of music, Mozart and Beethoven. Like, well, they did things that nobody else did. And they created essentially a genre, even to some degree more modern, like somebody like Billie Eilish came out with this very unique sound, this bedroom pop, whispery vocals that
Yep.
nobody really did before. And
Yep.
now everybody kind of then, oh, a lot of people then, like she creates this like new lane on the highway, and now
Totally.
all these cars are following and behind her.
Totally.
So it's just interesting. So that all being said is talking about AI. Um, how are you going to create a new genre? When it's only looking at things of the past is a very interesting question.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, it can be scary because it almost feels convincing, like it is good only because it's familiar, right?
Oh,
Um,
that's very interesting, man. An
yeah.
interesting, a very interesting argument, I guess, or point.
Yeah. So like truly with art, it's not, yes, everybody wants like the professional sound, right? But sometimes new is better than good. You know what I mean? Like on paper, it could be like technically bad almost, but that could be the defining thing of your sound.
Well, you look at some things like Bon Iver. I watched the video earlier today where he was playing this huge set, like the venues he's able to sell out. He's a incredible musician and stuff. And don't get me wrong, but he's been around for a long time. And it
Hmm.
still blows my mind that like, man, this guy's still crushing like the music industry. He's not talked about as much anymore, but he, and then Taylor Swift came on stage and he sang a song with Taylor Swift because they have that song together. But the point being, I was like, it was his show. It wasn't like he was a feature on Taylor's show. It was his show that Taylor because it came out.
Right.
Point being, though, is like you go back to one of his first albums, is it the For Emma album, where one of his most popular tracks is Regarding Stacks, or R.E. Stacks. You listen to it though, and technically it's terrible. It's just not a well modern professional sound. But
Right.
meanwhile, it's a beautiful piece of art that everybody regards as one of like a phenomenal
Totally.
album.
Yeah.
So it's the same exact thing. Like AI, I don't think would create this mistake of an album because it's looking for the right answer, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes that right answer is the wrong thing.
Yeah. Totally. Totally agree.
Very
So
interesting.
yeah.
That's probably one of the most interesting aspects of talking about AI that I've ever heard. So that's a really some food for thought. People that
Yeah.
are
Totally.
listening, definitely listen to what Rob just said. Well, rewind that one because that's a really interesting aspect.
Yeah. Totally.
Um, have you ever messed with any of those AI things like the Lander or any of those other? I mean, DistroKid just released one.
Yeah. DistroKid. I think SoundCloud. I think
Oh,
it's
really?
Dolby online mastering. Actually, early on with Lander, I did try that out. I actually did a shootout between a Sterling Soundmaster and Lander several years ago.
For what? For your music or
Yeah,
for
whenever I was
that's
doing more of like mixing. So a buddy of
okay.
mine, I generally don't like to do more than two things in any project. So if I'm like producing and mixing, I don't.
Very interesting. Okay,
Just kind of have a fresh perspective because like sometimes you just get in it too much.
sure.
You just
That's cool.
perspective. So yeah, I was doing stuff with a buddy of mine in North Carolina. He was a writer, singer, and I did producing and mixing on it. So we sent it to Sterling, and at the same time, I ran it through Lander because I was kind of curious. I think, gosh, this was like maybe 2016,
They've been
20.
around a long time. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, yeah. It was early on. But I mean, like I said before, it was like pointed out technical things that I could be like, okay, then let's address that. But beyond that, like the sound, obviously, Sterling blew it out of the water. But it was still interesting to see, the results.
Hmm.
Because louder is technically not always better. So, and it was the Lander Master was very loud. So,
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting industry. Just in general, as taking it even outside of mastering, just the AI or algorithmic aspect. I've heard people describe as people like, oh, AI are going to take it's something to be afraid of. But I think that to some degree, I think it's something that we could use as tools, as opposed to like, oh, I'm going to have Chat GPT write me the song and then I'm going to record it and then you're not going anywhere. But like if you like, for example, something I do is like when we get finished with this interview, I'll be like, I have a general idea of what we talked about and say, hey, Chat GPT, write me a catchy YouTube title for this interview with Rob Richards where we talk about mastering and AI and the music. And I'll give it all the prompts and then it'll write me four different options. And I'm like, beautiful.
uh,
Like, so it's like, I'm using it as a tool. I didn't say, hey, AI, conduct this interview with Rob Richards for me, like
right.
so I'm just using it as a tool and it's been interesting. And especially the people that are really good at it. I had some guy that created some website used it to code a website, like just because he doesn't know how to code, so he asked ChatGPT to code it. It's pretty remarkable, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. For doing things like, Squarespace has their thing for doing like website type stuff. Yeah. You can slide by on that. But like, for like more application type stuff, that's a little bit more difficult. Like, sure, you can like have it spit out scripts for you,
Hmm.
but you kind of have to piece that script in the context of the whole application.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
that's
Oh,
still,
I'm talking to a coder right here, so I mean, what am I, so I put my foot in my mouth right there.
no,
So,
I mean, I've used it for coding too, just kind of like play around and see like what it could do. And it was kind of awesome. Like it shaved off, several hours of coding time, but there were a few little bugs here and there that I had to go through and kind of clean up.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's really interesting, even in that industry, like software engineering. So
So I'd love to hear your perspective on somebody that is very technical, being, your software engineer. So kind of using the right side of your brain as opposed to the left side of your brain more in that software engineer, the more technical versus creative side. I'd be curious just in your perspective on if you ever find that your analytical brain stifles your creative brain. or vice versa.
Yeah. So, I mean, with software engineering, you definitely have to plan things out. So you have to have kind of an end goal, right? Which I guess with mastering, that's kind of what I do whenever I listen to it. I'm like, okay, here's where that is, and this is where it needs to go. And I build the signal flow of my chain to get there. Software engineering is kind of the same thing. Like, okay, I have this feature in this application. Here's the specific tools I need to use to get there, and just kind of like piece things together, write custom code to execute the signal flow, basically. I mean, honestly, coding, once you get past the technical syntax and like what a programming language can do under the hood, honestly, programming is pretty creative.
Mhm.
So, getting to build things and with especially with user interface development, like different behaviors of the user interface, what's happening, like how I'm passing data around. You have the signal flow from your audio into your buses and how you route it and stuff like that. It's kind of the same thing except with data. I don't know that it really like stifles it. It's more of like a different way to think about my approach.
Yeah.
Because with programming, there's 1,000 different ways you can get the same result, right? So
So I'm
yeah,
curious, and I wonder if creativity, instead of hindering, actually like, gives a benefit to the analytical side of the brain, because it gives creative opportunity for you to fix problems that maybe the analytical side has trouble seeing the answer to.
I've always kind of had the approach of like learn the rules so I know how to break them.
Exactly.
Like I
Sure.
know exactly like what's supposed to happen, but it's more of like that question of like, okay, well, what if we do it like this?
Yeah.
What's the output, right?
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, that's kind of how I approach both mastering and software engineering, really.
Sure.
So
Very interesting.
yeah,
Well, very, very, very interesting conversation, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. But before we wrap it up, a final question that I like to ask everybody as the final question: what is something, with you being where you are in your career now, what is something that you wish you knew when you first started out?
don't be afraid to say yes to projects that you think are not worth your time.
Mm,
We'll be willing to learn. Because you always have this grand vision of like, oh, I want to be here and this is what I need to do, X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to waste my time on that. But at the same time, the thing on the side could ultimately get you around a lot quicker to the where you're trying to go. So be humble, have an open hand and be willing to put in the work. I mean, and have a genuine curiosity of what you're interested in
yeah.
and into it. So yeah.
Very interesting, man. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah.
Before we wrap it up, I do want to say thank you to every single person that watches this far, or you guys are the true ones making it to the end of the interview. Definitely, all the links will be of Rob's everything, because he's got a ton of stuff, cool stuff going on. Will be in the links down in the description down below, so go check that out. Best way to support this channel is checking out my own original music. So thank you for watching, Rob. Thank you so much for taking the time, man. I really appreciate it. And I wish you the best in all things you have going forward.
Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. I'll catch you guys in the next one. God bless and peace out.